So this is the first of 3 videos that are going to comprise the conventions lesson for your synthesis essay. And so what I always like to do at the end of this semester is just walk you through all the things that you've learned. And just to make you think about how much better your writing is now because you have had these specific individual lessons that have been connected to each one of these papers. So in this file, I'm reminding you of which essay we did, what the focus of that conventions lesson was, and then what rules in the pocket style manual you should be going over in order to eliminate them in the final draft of your essay. And so what I want to do here is just keep going back and forth between the pocket style manual, which I'm going to show you electronically, and that document so that you can pay attention to what you need to do, think about some things that I'm reminding you of as you listen, and hopefully you can also stop the video, go back through and check your essay to see if you have any errors in that, and then move forward. Okay, so the first essay that we did this fall was the maturity memoir, and we paid attention to run-on sentences then. And the run-on rule is Rule 15. When we go back and take a look at it in the book here in a moment, Rule 15 is on revising run-ons. I also wrote down Rule 17A because that's the first part of the comma rule, and Part 17A reminds you that you need to put a comma with coordinating conjunctions, and that's exactly one of the ways that you're going to fix a run-on. So remember that you can go into your pocket style manual, you can take a look at the various ways for how you can fix it. Most of the time, if you guys are still having problems, it's because you're using a coordinating conjunction but you're forgetting the comma. So you need to make sure that that comma goes before the coordinating conjunction, or you're still having issues with your semicolons, right? Or sometimes, remember, you just need to separate the sentences or restructure the sentence so that it sounds a little bit better. The second conventions lesson that we did was for the college essay, and this was also a 2-parter. Remember that the first thing that we went over is fragments, and fragments is Rule 14, and then we used our knowledge of fragments to help you do better with semicolons and colons. And so Rule 14 was right here. Remember that some fragments are clauses and some fragments are phrases, excuse me, and sometimes there can be acceptable fragments. So fragment and clauses are often created because you have an independent clause that you have placed a subordinating conjunction in front of it, and now you're treating it as it's still an independent clause, but it's not. So you really have to watch out for those subordinating conjunctions. And then sometimes those fragment and phrases are also they're so long that you think that it's a sentence, but when you really break down the grammar, you don't have a clear subject or you don't have a clear verb, so kind of keep that in mind. The best way to fix them is to pull it into a nearby sentence, though sometimes you might just have to rewrite it. Okay, so for the comparison essay, we sort of went farther in our knowledge of dependent clauses, which remember is exactly what we just talked about from Rule 14. Oh wait, I forgot to go back over the semicolons and colons rule with you. Let me do that. Let's go to 18 first before I get ahead of myself. Remember that here we're looking at the differences between these 2 pieces of punctuation. The semicolon is the stop connect. You can only use it between items of equal grammatical rank, which means you can only use it between independent clauses or if you have a series that has internal punctuation. The colon is going to be really useful for you in this particular synthesis essay because besides just not mixing them up with semicolons, the most important thing that came from this particular lesson that you're going to want to use, oh, and of course it's not behaving right now. I forgot that this one always has problems when I try to get into it. We'll go this way. We'll trick it. Or we won't trick it. We'll trick it this way. There we go. One of the most useful things with the colon is for the ending of a signal phrase. So if you have a complete thought signal phrase and you are connecting it to a complete thought, an independent clause, quote, then you should be putting a colon here as the connecting between your signal phrase and your quote instead of a comma. So a lot of you are used to putting commas here at the end of any signal phrase, but if your signal phrase is a complete thought and your quote is a complete thought, then you need to use a colon at the end of that signal phrase. All right, now we're ready to move on to complex sentences. And complex sentences, what I've listed here for you is Rule 17b. Again, Rule 17 is the comma rule. But basically what's happening here is you need to remember if you need a comma or not with a complex sentence. And so I'm going to add something here, and that is the letters IC and DC. Remember, that stands for independent clause and dependent clause. So if your independent clause comes before the dependent clause, there is no comma. If your dependent clause comes before the independent clause, you do need a comma at the end of that introductory clause. And so if we go back into Rule 17, this is exactly what Rule 17b says. You need a comma after an introductory word group, and one of the main types of introductory word groups that we use are adverb clauses, dependent clauses. Remember, they have a variety of different names. So you're going to remember that these are dependent clauses because you're going to be able to recognize the subordinating conjunction. So keep that in mind, right? You're looking for subordinating conjunctions, and that's going to help you. Okay. For the essay of definition or illustration, we went over parallel structure. The parallel structure rule is Rule 3. This one can be tricky, and it just kind of depends on you as individual students. Some of you struggle mightily with parallel structure, and for others, it just comes very naturally. Or it comes very naturally until you get to one sentence, and that one sentence just isn't working for you. So my best advice, beyond just going back and looking at Rule 3 again, is to recognize when you're using a series, right? But also recognize when you're using a pair of something, a pair of verbs, a pair of nouns, or when you're trying to make two sentences that are super similar to one another. Make sure that you try to keep the structure of the sentence in mind. And if you ever run into a sentence that just makes you go, "Bleh," email it to me, right? If you know that it's a grammar problem and not a content or word choice problem, I can help you with grammar pretty quickly. All right, essay of classification or causation, that was an unnecessary comma problem, so we're back to Rule 17. Mainly it's Rule 17J, but in understanding Rule 17J, you end up using most of the comma rule. But again, if I'm going to identify these sentences for you in your text, I'm just wanting to identify the ones where you're overusing the comma. So I'm not going to make you memorize all the reasons why you need a comma, though if you look at them, then recognizing the misuses of the comma will come easier. I would rather see you eliminate times when you're using the comma unnecessarily, because when you put too many commas in, it makes things really choppy and awkward. I can always teach you later, hey, put a comma here, hey, put a comma here, but it's really hard to teach kids to be less choppy. So I would rather have you fix this error than directly memorize all of these like 7 times. Though, looking at all of these is going to help you with that, so keep that in mind. Then for this essay, we're going to talk briefly about contractions and commonly misused or commonly confused words. That's going to be the next video that you look at, and then the third video is going to give you a strategy on how to address that issue really quickly. As far as the Pocket Style Manual goes, I think I forgot to say this in the other videos, but basically you're going to be using the glossary of usage at the end of the book. There's 2 different glossaries in the text. If you go down here, you can see both of them all the way at the bottom. You've got 2 glossaries. One is a glossary of usage and one is a glossary of grammatical terms. This helps define what things are. So if I say subordinating conjunction to you and you don't know what I'm talking about, you go here and you look it up. The glossary of usage is going to give you all sorts of words that we commonly misuse, right? People mix up the spelling of accept and accept, adapt and adopt, adverse and averse. So my suggestion to you is always going to be look through the list. Look through the list and get to know your own problems, your own habits, and then how to fix them. The one that I'm going to ask you to do and to fix directly in your text is going to have to do with some spelling and contractions, and you'll learn that in the next video. The last thing that I have to say is a piece of advice that I was once given by a newspaper editor when he came to talk to some of my sophomore classes about, I don't know, probably 8 years ago now. And it was the best piece of advice that I've ever heard about editing. So remember that editing is a separate process from revising. When you're revising, you are trying to pay attention to your ideas, your organization, your word choice. You're really trying to make sure that your thoughts are clear. When you switch over to editing, remember that's like the dental draft from the beginning of the semester, where you're really just trying to nitpick on your spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Whenever he would finalize an article for the newspaper, he always followed this procedure. He would read his essay backwards, sentence by sentence. So he'd start with the last sentence, and he would read it fully and make sure he was happy with the grammar. He would read the next sentence, and then he would make sure that he was happy with his conventions. And then the third to the last sentence, and then the fourth to the last sentence, all the way back up until he'd read the first sentence. What he was doing there was tricking his brain. So when you guys have been reading these synthesis essays over and over and over again, looking for transitions, and is my signal phrase clear, and is this the best quote choice, your head just gets wrapped up in the ideas that you want to present. Whereas if you deliberately read something sentence by sentence backwards, now you don't need to care about content. You are only caring about grammar and punctuation and spelling. So if that helps you to sort of focus better by just taking it one sentence at a time, it's definitely going to help you find fragments. It's probably going to make you see colons and semicolons in a different light. And so I would suggest that you try that and see if it fixes any of the errors that you've commonly been struggling with.